And please don't escalate this incident of Mr. Mallet to unrealistic levels. Please object to the motion together with us.
Mr. Ray Chan. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of Ms. Claudia's motion to summon the Secretary for Security and Director of Immigration to attend before the Council to explain the government's decision to not renew the work visa of Mr. Mallet. A number of members already spoke. Mr. Gary Chan said it's a waste of time to discuss this issue. If that's the case, you should save your time and indeed just proceed to the vote. But that said, it was good that you spoke because the world has been following our debate at LegCo. They cared more about the Victor Mallet incident compared with Hong Kong people. What the Democratic camp said is something expected from the international community, so they actually want to hear from the pro-Beijing camp and your twisted logic. So one day, if you are denied entry into another country, you would know why. I have followed the speeches of the dozen or so pro-Beijing members, including Madam Deputy. Of course, it's great and correct to follow the party line. Ms. Starry Lee spoke in a very high pitch compared with the way she normally speaks. You can check the video recording. It wasn't very natural. Well, I don't want to make analogies. I will just say it was akin to female speakers in the past from the Communist Party. For Mr. Christopher Chang, I didn't quite understand his entire speech, but he said it was obvious, and a number of members talked about this theme. We want to summon the officials because we do not want any guessing. We want the government to explain clearly where the red line is. They must tell the foreigners, Hong Kong people, and the international community why Mr. Mallet was denied a work visa. Dr. Priscilla Leung was very honest. The entire pro-Beijing camp is more upright than the government. The government acted but refused to make explanations. And Dr. Priscilla Leung said it's not possible to even provide a platform. Would the government dare to say that? Mr. Andrew Wong made a very good analogy for election forums. Even if I allow different candidates to speak, I would not. It doesn't mean I'm supporting any specific candidate. So what if anyone talks about Hong Kong independence in a forum? If you run a forum and a candidate talks about Hong Kong independence, then the broadcaster might not have their TV license renewed next time. You talked about global broadcasts. Even if you do a Facebook Live broadcast, everyone in the world can see it. So it's no big deal at all. Of course, the government has a right to do so, and they did not have to give a reason. Of course, if you had no right to do so, you would be sued already. You said there's no need to offer a reason. Let's not always talk about practice. Yesterday we were talking about the obscene articles ordinance, and in the preliminary assessment, no reason needs to be given. Our stance is by giving a clear explanation it would be better for everyone, and that you can contain the damage caused by the Victor Mallet incident. I would only talk about damage control because the damage has been done and it's a lot worse than you imagined. A number of pro-Beijing members said this is international practice. Let me just talk about this. When you talk about practice, that means it's something practiced by different people. So you gave a lot of examples. So even if there were examples, doesn't mean they the others had it right. You must judge whether what happened in the past was reasonable. So for the arrest of Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Turkey, well, that's what happened. So what about, so are you going to say we'll follow it in Hong Kong or China because it's international practice? So are you going to embrace this kind of logic? You must judge whether something is right or wrong. So while we talk about international practice, if you truly believe in this, you might be brainwashed by state media. You have no global perspective. The UK consulate in Hong Kong offered a high-profile statement. Perhaps they received different reports. The UK consulate issued a statement saying that the UK government would explain the reason for rejection so that the applicants can lodge an appeal. So in fact, if you have an appeal mechanism, you must offer a reason for denial of entry or work visa, or else the rejected applicants could only speculate on the reasons for denial. So this is the first reason I support Ms. Mo's motion. If you allow an appeal, you should also offer the reason of denial. If this motion is passed, I think it would be international practice to allow the government to explain the reason. In other words, they would have to disclose the real reason for denying the work visa application of Victor Mallet. So this would be in line with international practice, but instead of mainland practice. Apart from forcing the government to align with international practice by producing all the relevant records and documents, it would also review the government's decision-making process and whether the decision was related to the luncheon involving Andy Chan. The government did not understand why the chambers of commerce, EU, etc. had such a big reaction towards the decision. The reason was that those bodies felt that the decision was related to freedom of the press. For a developed economy, the luncheon involving Andy Chan was a platform for foreign correspondents to know more about Andy Chan's views rather than to advocate Hong Kong independence. The FCC often invites speakers of different political stance. So if what they say are against your political stance, you are going to bash them or even take out retribution. In the past, the US President Donald Trump would be invited to speak Republicans and Democrats could all speak. So for journalists in developed countries, they cannot understand why inviting someone to talk about Hong Kong independence is an advocate of Hong Kong independence. So if that's the logic, then all of us who are speaking on this issue would be advocates. So for members waiting to speak, I invite you to do so. So why would members who support Claudia's motion be indirectly supporting Hong Kong independence? If Mr. Mallet's work visa application was rejected since he ran this talk, you can make this reason known. For Europe and the US, so the work visa was rejected for Mr. Mallet. If the government can show that the work visa rejection was not related to the luncheon, but due to other reasons, they should make the reasons known. Apart from journalists, it is very hard for businesses to grasp the standards of the Chinese Communist Party and the government, and they have deep concerns. If the motion is carried, foreign businesses would have a clearer understanding on the work visa criteria for the government. The foreign businesses are very concerned because they do not know what the government standards are. And no matter how much you invest, you might be barred from conducting business. So this is entirely possible. If I'm a foreigner with businesses in Hong Kong, I had a meal with Andy Chan, and I might be accused of secretly supporting him. I might be denied entry. So you can judge whether these concerns are legitimate. The government refused to give a reason, but they released some word that Mr. Mallet conducted some acts, and as such, he was denied a work visa. So what you are trying to achieve is to expand the red line. Finally, I did not quite understand the government's logic till I read an article called "From E-Cigarettes to Hong Kong Independence." So what is the relevance between the both? After I read the article, I understand it all. So people ask why you are banning e-cigarettes but not traditional cigarettes. So the situation is it's not possible to bar all cigarettes because the cost is too high. But while the e-cigarettes are just an emerging product, so you've decided to ban it. Andy Chan is a Hong Kong resident. You can say he breaches the basic law, but there is no law to stop him from opening his mouth. For Victor Mallet, it would be hard to terminate his work visa if he's still on a long visa. But if he requests a work visa extension, then the visa could the application could be rejected. It's just like TV broadcasters when it comes to license renewal. The authorities have the right to turn them down. The same goes for university lecturers. They have academic freedom and freedom of speech, but their contracts might not be renewed. So this is what happens in an authoritarian government. you cannot attack Andy Chan in any other way, for example, by jailing him. The government would take action in other manners, and they would not think about the price, and they want to throw a baton. That's what the government is doing.
Mr. Ma from Kwok. Madam Deputy, the Victor Mallet Financial Times Hong Kong Asian News editor, whose visa renewal was rejected, have roused gravely concern, and especially among journalists. Some press associations concern have been understood by me. But whether this incident would impact Hong Kong freedom of speech and freedom of the press, there are diverse views on this. First, on the wording of the Claudia's motion, in which that claimed that there were the visa have been refused to renew for no reason. At this stage, we don't know what are the real reasons for refusal to renewal. That doesn't mean that the government done so without cause. Just in line with other countries, whether the applicant would meet the general requirements, they will also look into the individual circumstances and in accordance with the laws and policies in considering whether to approve such applications. The media also reported back in 1998 when responding to legal questions that while processing a work visa, there will be 6 criteria, which included the applicant has no adverse record, and the activities of the applicant and the employer will be beneficial to Hong Kong as a whole. Thus, I regarded the Immigration Department's decision as well-founded and after careful deliberations. Some speculated that the visa renewal refusal would have to do with the FCC's invitation of Mr. Andy Chan to hold a luncheon seminar. There's no way for me to find out is that the reason for the government's refusal, but speculating on that as a main reason is not entirely unreasonable, even though it might be the real actual reason. In accusing the government of using political means to suppress freedom of the press and freedom of the speech is very unsensible. We agree that these journalists play a very important social role. They will need as a messenger of information as being checked on the government and as well to expose social injustice. The news media practitioners also have the right to reporting, and freedom of the press and the freedom to publish is a prerequisite of the open and progressive society. In Hong Kong, these have been protected under basic law. The government is obligated to ensure these rights are not infringed. And looking at this incident, Mr. Mallet acted as the organizer, as the FCC vice chairman, and not the journalist who organized this luncheon, to provide a platform in which he himself act as the host and a moderator, which invited someone that the government had expressly claimed that the leader of the political party, which will be outlawed very soon, which violate the PRC constitution and the basic law, which is Hong Kong independence, which he to advocate his Hong Kong for independence idea. Mr. Mallet took part as the organizer instead of fulfilling the reporting duties of a journalist. Thus, I could hardly agree that this has to do with freedom of the press and freedom of speech. Before the event, the SCRG and the Chinese Foreign Ministry had repeatedly reminded and advised the relevant organization and the person in charge to highlight the problems with this event. And the organization and the organizer insisted on going on their way, they could hardly convince the society that this is actually beneficial to Hong Kong as a whole. Thus, very hard to convince that these are persons welcome in Hong Kong. But whether Hong Kong need to explain the immigration's decision. After the Victor Mel incidents, a lot of organizations have pressed the government to give in full account or even to withdraw decision. And internationally, for such matters, the relevant governments want to comment on specific cases. I will not provide the reasons. That's the usual practice around the world. While their motive is manifold, maybe it has to do with sensitive information or the need for confidentiality or just to avoid a diplomatic scuffle. All in all, we certainly casually have this precedent since this incidents like this will be a frequent occurrence. And Hong Kong as a special administrative region, the immigration matters fall within the scope of hydro economy. The Director of Immigration applied existing statutes and consider the actual circumstances in making decision. The HKSAR, just like any other governments, would not need to explain to the public. I would like to make my own observations on what Mr. Ray Chen had just spoken. He first pointed out that the Hong Kong government have to make it explicit. Looking at the incident, the Korean statutes confer only limited powers to the government. And this matter, it has to do with whether the national security is truly being safeguarded. The Hong Kong government has been given the duty to legislate on national security, as of this date have yet to be fully implemented. Thus, the national security had yet to give sufficient and reasonable protection. And through this incident, and I think the necessity to legislate has now truly been highlighted. Second, he mentioned that the government has been abusing its powers. So while criticizing the government for abusing its power, with power comes with obligations. The government, of course, had this power but it should be applied in the context of the duty to do so, whether to the country, to the society, or to the Hong Kong public. It's very important to discharge the duty to ensure that the national security is safeguarded, to ensure the Hong Kong society will enjoy peace and order, to make sure the Hong Kong's lifestyle will not be affected. There will be, and also touched on the question of right and wrong. My view is that if we regarded that we acknowledge that the government's action have been right through this debate, so there's been no question of the government of having any wrongdoing. By banning such activity or not allowing Mr. Mao to do this, what he said, the prohibition can be criticizing the government for which they was supporting Hong Kong independence in secret. On this huge important issue, if we can tell right from wrong, if you're to criticize the Hong Kong government had did something wrong and wrongly exercising its powers, which objectively supporting this unlawful acts. Madam Deputy, I understand this incident have aroused some concern from the press and certain social circles. However, if the Hong Kong government, as usual, protect the Hong Kong press freedom as per basic law, by applying concrete action to illustrate to the world that the press freedom of Hong Kong has not been affected by the incident. And I also believe that the time is offered the best proof, and I believe that this incident will not have any adverse impact to Hong Kong. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Mr. James To. Madam Deputy, I have listened very carefully to members who have spoken these 2 days. I shall not repeat what the Democrats have said in support of the motion. But I'd just like to add one point. I, of course, support Ms. Mo's motion. I understand whether it be the central authorities or the SARG, they'd like to safeguard territorial integrity and unification of the country. I totally understand that they have this constitutional duty, and also this is their work, and they are repeating the zero tolerance policy. I understand that the SARG has that duty and it is under pressure. But I also think that this decision must be a political one. We have acted according to procedures, but this is a political decision of the Carrie Lam government. I think we should try to evaluate the concrete results of this decision. You have zero tolerance towards Hong Kong independence. You have to maintain territorial integrity of the country. But if there is a talk, it's a talk, what are you suppressing? If you could have done something concrete in order to prevent the talk from taking place, well, that's one way. But I don't know, because of some reason and maybe because of legal constraints, the talk took place. Now you are banning a political party. And to the international community, this is actually a quite innocent journalist who just happens to be the first vice president of the club, and the club hosted the talk. He himself did not host the talk. And now you have expelled that foreign journalist. And when he came back to Hong Kong, he was a British, and we only gave him a few days visa to stay in Hong Kong. And did we actually help to publicize the talk of Mr. Chan by talking about Hong Kong independence? Or have we been able to suppress the publicity of Hong Kong independence? Madam Deputy, I'm afraid that given the foreign media's coverage, which you know the US, EU, and Canadian governments have all spoken, and there are journals and newspapers, as you know, he is the vice president of a journalist club. Well, these people who are speaking up are not exactly just harboring their lot, but they want to talk about what he has done wrong. It's just like any other place in the world you can host a talk, and he has in fact said that whether it is his own organization or Mr. Mallet himself, he did not say that he supported Hong Kong independence. So we have stood to lose and lose quite a bit. If you're only talking about suppressing Hong Kong independence, you should not be publicizing it both in Hong Kong and in the international community. But now you have done something very foolish. And I wouldn't repeat what hurt this has done. People doubt one country, two systems and press freedom. I won't go into that. But even on the issue of suppressing Hong Kong independence, well, you have awakened the world to it. People might not have noticed, but now, given your attention, people are awakened to it. Remember, foreign journalists, whether in Hong Kong or outside, have heard Mr. Andy Chan, and somebody has quoted Time magazine to say that this is a child's revolution. They don't think much of it. They wouldn't like to write follow-up stories on it. He is not regarded as Dr. Sun Yat-sen, and that Hong Kong has a future of independence, that the entire picture might look different. Nothing of that sort. But suddenly, Andy Chan was so much featured in foreign news. Apart from Carrie Lam, the other person from Hong Kong is Mr. Andy Chan. Why? Actually, the press coverage was not that much. But now you have expelled a foreign journalist, and now the entire world is paying attention. It is so foolish. Madam Deputy, I believe the decision must have been done here only in Hong Kong, guessing the will of the central authorities. I believe this has been done by Hong Kong government officials, whether it be the CE, the secretary, etc., not the director of immigration. Of course not. To me, well, even here at this juncture, I believe whether it be the CE or the Secretary for Security, they are trying to play safe, and it's easy for them to make such a decision, particularly for the CE. She is erring on the side of safety. She is following the footsteps of the country. But is this a wise decision? Are you looking at the bigger picture? Remember, if you have followed the instructions of the country, and even if you have guessed it, you have done it right, and that's okay. But if you have done something wrong, then it is your own responsibility. Please look at the situation Hong Kong is in. What is the conflict between the US and China? Why is it that all of a sudden our country is inviting the Premier of Japan to visit, and then you say that the relationship between the two countries is back on the right track, and Global Times is saying that the Diaoyu Island conflict is very childish and naive because it has not worked towards friendship between Japan and China. Look, that has happened over a few weeks, and that was carried in Global Times. So let us look at the bigger picture. Madam Deputy, what is a wise decision? Are you not making trouble for the country? Have you tapped the wrong pulse of the bigger picture? Because now there is a dangerous conflict between US and China. And where does Hong Kong stand in this? The entire world, especially the US government, the EU, remember, you have to show concern towards this. We are not only talking about Hong Kong interest, Madam Deputy, we are talking about the country's interest. The country's interest lies in Hong Kong giving play to the advantage of one country, two systems on a continuous basis. That has been much talked about these few years. Therefore, you really have to understand what should be the right thing to do in this situation. If nothing was happening like 2-3 years ago, the impact would not be so great. Madam Deputy, from the viewpoint of the country, this is a decision that is creating trouble for the country. If you want to err on the side of safety and have made this foolish decision, well, I'm afraid that C.Y. Leung has a different thought. And of course, I don't want to make things worse for you. But politics is about doing the right thing at the right moment. If you only look at Hong Kong, you are not a politician. You don't understand the complicated picture in the international arena. But this is not the end. We are supporting Ms. Mo's motion so that we can drag on the matter. If through the appeal of Financial Times, the visa would be renewed, then I would believe you would do something clever and make a wise decision in this bigger picture of US-China conflict. I hope the SARG will apply some wisdom. It is important to suppress Hong Kong independence, but then where should Hong Kong be placed in the context of the country's interests so that China will not bear more pressure from this conflict with the U.S.?
黃國健議員。
Mr. Wong Kwok-Kim. Madam Deputy, recently I met some of my friends and some of them told me that they had sympathy towards LegCo members because there are fracas at LegCo every single day. Whether or not this is a farce, I would leave it to the public. But if this is a farce, then we should give this show a name. I think we are. This is a finger-pointing game. According to the Pan-Democrats, this is a suppression of freedom of the press and freedom of speech. But from what they said, apparently this is more like a scaremongering exercise. A lot of opposition members cited overseas bodies or the American Chamber of Commerce or what the UK said. Apparently, they totally believed in what the foreigners or foreign bodies said, and they used them as reasons or ammunition to attack the SAR government. Mr. James To, who just spoke, said that at this time of US-China trade tension, the denial of the visa application of Victor Mallet would lead to retribution from the US, and this would jeopardize Hong Kong's economy. Is this really the case? This is just scaremongering. When you look at more recent examples, a journalist from the Washington Post called Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. The US president stated that no sanctions would be imposed on Saudi Arabia since it would jeopardize their national interests. According to news this morning, the UK foreign minister said the same. He said, having considered the relationships with Saudi Arabia, he must also consider the commercial interests of the UK. So apparently, many foreign governments place top priority on their own interests. On the other hand, some of our lawmakers feel that our interests are not important and that the rights of a foreign correspondent is more important. President, I would not speculate on the reason why Victor Mallet's work visa application was rejected. Per usual practice, the SAR government would not comment on this, and there's no way for us to know. But some LegCo members have been speculating on various reasons and used them against the SAR government. The Federation of Trade Unions would object to Ms. Claudia MO's motion because we support the SAR government's work in enforcing our immigration policy under the Basic Law. According to Article 154 of the Basic Law, the government of the Hong Kong SAR may apply immigration controls on entry into, stay-in, and departure from the region by persons from foreign states and regions. The SAR government is empowered by the Central People's Government in this aspect. I'm sure the same applies to other countries in the world. Any person that is suspected to be jeopardizing the interests of a country, or if a person is unwelcome due to other reasons, he or she might be denied entry. In this incident, Mr. Mallet is a journalist, and that's why some people have tried to create a story out of it. Let's not forget the political powers behind. For example, the US and UK had, on many instances, denied entry by journalists, so it should not come as a surprise. Apart from their journalistic work, journalists might also engage in other types of work. So could some of them jeopardize our interests, and would some of their acts be unacceptable? I think there is a question mark. We are only speculating on the reason and using it against the SAR government. This is unfair. So all in all, we support the SAR government's work in accordance with the Basic Law and safeguarding Hong Kong's interests. The mission entrusted by the CPG to the SAR government should also be safeguarded, and that is, we must maintain the sovereignty of our nation. This is important under one country, two systems. It is not just about the commercial interests. Thank you.
Mr. Ted Hui. I speak to support Claudia's motion to pursuant to Article 73 to investigate the Mr. Victor Mallet's visa being refused renewal. This already aroused concern from the international community, for example, the EU and the American Chamber of Commerce, and others have pressed the government for explanation. First, I would like to condemn the chief executive. And she cited that it's international practice not to offer explanation to avoid the skepticism expressed by the international community. Such gesture couldn't be more wrong. Mr. Wang, what do you mean by usual practice? When did Hong Kong frequently refuse journalists or people with different political views on having their work visa denied extension? Is that a usual occurrence? And recently, the number of applicants being refused entry into Hong Kong has been on the rise. And for the City Magazine chief editor, Mr. Zhang Tiezi, Taiwan activist Lin Feifan, Taiwan scholar Wang Mingshou, Wu Jianwen, and for the Chiba Prefecture, Japan, a municipal councillor, and most recently, Benedict Rogers from the Conservative Party. In preventing overseas nationals from entering Hong Kong and denying visa renewal application is not a usual occurrence, but rather deterioration, where the Beijing government repeatedly interfere with Hong Kong affairs and evidence of jeopardizing one country, two system. So Hong Kong people and the electrical cannot put up with this. The freedom of the press is a cornerstone of Hong Kong prosperity. Even Beijing is of the view that our values and our freedom of the press is not music to his ear and feel we got in his way. However, under one country system, Beijing has no right to interfere. That's the whole premise of the one country two system, which the government is definitely aware of. So that's why we need to invoke the electrical PMP ordinance. Instead, the high officials of the government accept the Beijing interference, put one country above two system. The electrical PMP ordinance will take up the role of a check and balance of the government to investigate, as well as to warn the government and high officials that they should defend one country, two system. Otherwise, it would a dereliction of duty, which the Hong Kong people will definitely hold you accountable. And this incident has made a lot of expats in Hong Kong very worried. They're worried that the one country, two system will be under the brutal interference from the Beijing government, and all the provisions in the basic law was simply not enforced. The Hong Kong government had yet to offer a reasonable explanation that Victor Mallet, as the first vice chairman of the FCC, just for the sake of holding a forum, without explanation, how do you convince the Hong Kong people and the international community, how to make people believe that the Hong Kong government and the Beijing will observe the basic law? It has pointed out on that occasion, not only pro-independence activists were invited, they were also invited the people who are opposing Hong Kong independence as well as the government, providing an open platform for discussion. How could it be that smeared by the pro-establishment camp as a platform to promote Hong Kong independence, which couldn't be further from the truth? As we all know, in refusing to renew the visa of journalists is one way for the Beijing government to crack down on dissident journalists, and French journalists covering the Uyghurs' incarceration were given the same treatment. It shows that the Hong Kong government have been clearly listening to Beijing and simply take Beijing's command and to blatantly exercise Beijing's instructions. And some of the lawyer pro-Beijing camp that what evidence is there? I would say that the perception of the Hong Kong public will clearly notice that it's the will of the Beijing as a payback to a journalist. That's a matter of perception. So for Hong Kong government to undermine the one country two system, the high officials have citing that is international practice without offer explanation. It only shows that the government had appeared to be diffident. I hope that the government can do some soul searching by resorting to such administrative measures to and take up political missions from Beijing is simply avoiding the conscience as simple as well that banally evil. If you think that by obeying Beijing that you can harmonize the Hong Kong Beijing election, is simply foolish thinking. To succumb to Beijing interference and their brutal directives is to support the destruction of Hong Kong values. The the one who executes orders cannot escape their moral duty. What we thought to be well-intended will be crowned as betraying Hong Kong press freedom and the rule of law and the core values, and losing the collective trust of Hong Kong people. So has it become an culture and part of the authoritarian government, while the HKSAR due to its own liking and the opinion of Beijing to screen out who can work in Hong Kong, who can express themselves. If not to their liking, they will expel youth by the administrative means. It's just not only one example. And for the logical lawmakers, you're not agreed or like your political views and accuse you of pro-independence activists, they'll disqualify you. That's some kind of expulsion, such barbaric acts. In logical elections, some candidates will do their statements and their political views and advocacy being smeared by the government that resort to administrative means, and I'll ask the returning officer to disqualify you. Mr. Ted Hui, please return to the topic. I think the government have been applying this tactic. I hope that you appreciate where I'm going. But the government have a choice of who to choose as chief executive. Mr. Ted Hui, let me remind you this debate that in accordance with Article 73, 5, and 10 of the basic law of that to summon public officials. Thanks for reminding, President. I'm commenting on the screening up on the people you don't like. Well, maybe you want to screen me out and not allow me to speak further. Hong Kong should be in this way an open, accommodating society. So, when it comes to the DC election, the candidate have been screened out, and now for the legislative election, we're not talking about elections. We're talking about Mallet as a journalist working in Hong Kong, where it's right. They're only allowed to stay and FCC if they follow the rules set by them. Well, does that reflect that the Hong Kong government and the Beijing, that how barbaric it had become, that the basic rights has disappeared? See things how have unfolded. I hope that the perception camp to take this chance instead of a define of label being a rubber stamp. When the government refuses explanation, shouldn't you use your power as a lawmaker and press the government for explanation instead of shielding government to the end? To stop government abuse is the duty of lawmakers. Well, maybe not those of the perception camp. Your only job is to protect the government, to address the concerns of the English community in one country, two system, to demonstrate to Beijing that how to salvage the confidence of Hong Kong people instead of have it ruined in the loyalist camp, instead of the government who cede to Beijing as they wish, instead of destruction of liberty. I so submit. Any other members would like to speak?
Mr. Eddie Chu, I'd like to call for a quorum count.
朱凱廸議員，你是否想？
Mr. Adichie, would you like to speak? I intend to, but I will allow Mr. Paul Chair to speak first. Well, I already called upon you. If you'd like to speak, please do so now. I do need to speak. Please, can I get back the lectern? Thank you, President. It's not quite usual that there are so many people attending a debate. I think this is an important debate. The pro-China camp say this is a farce, that it is meaningless. But I do know that many members of the public and foreign organizations and media organizations are very concerned as to what the Legislative Council has to say on this mallet incident. I heard the pro-China camp speak, and their main viewpoints are, number one, that the convention is not to have to disclose the reasons. We can just expel you. Number two, that the convention is to expel you, and they quote overseas examples that other countries also expel people, so why can't we? And number three, individual members said, well, the SAR government did not state clearly why you expelled Mr. Mallet, but I know, they said, it's because Mallet and FCC have stepped on the red line. And you need to show him your colors. If you don't do that, we will have no face.
Well, where do you think that the group of loyalists is going to stand? So I would like to explain to you about these 3 points. Well, the first so-called convention is that it's not going to be disclosed. I'm sure that it's been elaborated enough. Mr. Philip Dykes, the chairman of the Bar Association, said that, well, you don't really give an explanation to the person involved. And there is going to be an appeal. So what do you expect them to do? And in cases of license applications, and if the application was rejected, then, well, it will have to be explained. And there is also yesterday when a famous Japanese writer was mentioned because his book was banned by the Obscene Articles Tribunal. Well, an explanation was given. How come in this case it doesn't apply? The second reason is that it is about authority. We have the power to expel someone. Some people cited cases from the US, Japan, and the UK. Just like what Mr. Ray Chen said, I ask members to cite, if they do, the full account of what happened, not just part of it. If you think that this is the reason, state it clearly, instead of saying, well, the others do it this way. Well, a journalist was killed in Saudi embassy in Turkey. You think that can happen in Hong Kong? Well, you have to cite the case in its entirety. According to Ms. Priscilla Leung, what happened was, well, there was the ban on the National Party, the Hong Kong National Party, and then FCC organized the luncheon, and then there is the Victor Mallet's expulsion, the de facto expulsion. What happened now? the most contentious point of this incident is, in the first place, why is the Hong Kong National Party banned? They've been teased for just a party of two. How come, for no apparent reason, you ban this party? Well, let's cite cases of Japan, UK, and the US. In Japan, there is this club that advocates the independence of an island. Well, if a luncheon is organized without asking the separatists of Ryukyu Islands to speak, what about in the US? They have constitutions which states how many states there are, how the federation was formed, and now there is the Yes California Independence movement. They advocate that there should be a referendum in 2019 on whether California should leave the Federation. Don't just cite Yemen and other journalists. Cite this case in the US. How come that the Yes California can exist in the US but not in Hong Kong? Well, there is the SNP, the Scottish National Party in the UK. I don't have to elaborate. So if you're going to cite cases or international conventions, then there should not be any ban on parties, any parties in the first place. If you now ban a party and then you strip the person's right to speak, and one of the persons who organized the luncheon, Mr. Mallet, was unfortunate enough to host this luncheon, and then you said to him that, well, you can't stay in Hong Kong, and you know full well why. It was made an example of it. It is just like do as I say, not as I do. That is a ridiculous reason, because what you show everyone is that in the LegCo there are so many people who advocate and defend a totalitarian approach. But this is a democratic system. You speak for the CPC, the China Communist Party, and you don't use reason. You just use the same reasons, just like disqualification. You said it's nothing to do with us. Is the returning officer's decision, and you say, well, Hong Kong people can't do it. It's done in the US. We should be allowed to do the same thing. Don't be so childish. The third reason is that it's a red line. Don't cross it. Beijing authorities have already said that there is a red line. You asked for it. That's what Ms. Priscilla Leung said. What happens here is that there are two starkly different sets of values that are at loggerheads. First is the red line ideas. Chinese Communist Party, the CP, has drawn a red line. So if you touch the red line, cross the red line directly or indirectly, you will be dealt with at the expense of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press. That is the first the first version. However, this version is not in line with what Hong Kong people think. You now try to impose this version onto Hong Kong people. The red line is everything. All the rights you have been enjoying should move aside. So you say that, well, you have freedom of speech, but there are these provisos. You can run in an election, but these are the provisos. These are provisos. You have this right, but this and that. In effect, you don't have it. And then you try to give us some so-called reasons. There is another set of values which is mainstream. Please, Hong Kong people, don't forget it because they try to impose another set of values onto you. These are freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of speech. They are freedom enjoyed by Hong Kong people. It has taken root in Hong Kong a long time ago. Yes, in the colonial days, I don't have the misconception that they were all well and good. They arrested people, they threw them into jail, they expelled them, they stopped people from forming parties and organizations. However, Hong Kong people have started forming the set of values. The British government can be engaged in a power struggle with mainland China. Hong Kong people basically still enjoy freedom of speech. Now there is this domino effect. I'm not going to repeat. What has FCC done? After the first tile of the domino set has fallen, that is the ban of the Hong Kong National Party, they came out to speak. I really appreciate what they have done because at that time Hong Kong people were scared. Yet FCC came out to speak, to advocate and defend freedom of assembly. They have sacrificed themselves. You threaten them, you coerce them. Victor Mallet was sacrificed. They defended Hong Kong to stop the tiles from continuing to fall. I thank the FCC, I thank Mr. Victor Mallet, but let's not leave it at that. Ms. Mo's motion is very clear. Now there is this domino effect. We try to stop it from falling any further and we will put them upright again. We asked you for papers and documents because we require you to be frank to Hong Kong people. Just like what Miss Priscilla Leung said. Give us the reasons that she stated. And we ask you to rectify the mistake. You are against Hong Kong independence. That's well and good, but it doesn't mean that you should ban the party, the Hong Kong Independence Party. They should be allowed to speak. There is this party advocating independence of the Ryukyu Island, which is near Okinawa. The party just comprises of a few people. You should not be afraid of them. Yes, you scare of them, but you should not act like a bull in a china shop and just try to destroy and ruin everything because you're scared. And I'd like to give a reminder to the loyalists. These are not values that came up all of a sudden. 1967, when you were suppressed and oppressed by the colonial government, that is this Wu Daizhao Pun Waiwei from Tai Kung Pao. They were accused of printing inciting or insidious articles, and they were thrown in jail. And you said that, well, there is persecution of Chinese people, and this is political persecution. A number of news agencies jointly published a statement condemning the colonial government for suppressing freedom of speech, and they started with persecuting news agencies. Well, I support you back in. I would have supported you back in 1967. Now you say something different. You say that, well, when I am suppressed, I will advocate freedom of speech, but not now.
Honorable Co-Chair. Mr. President, let me first of all declare, well, I've been a member of the FCC for 30 years. At the same time, I would like to say that what I won't be saying in this debate, other than what Mr. Pt4 has said, that is, he has been guessing what sort of position members will take. Now, on this occasion, I won't talk about the red line, red line theory, and try to guess what caused it. And I won't talk about the capacity of Victor Mallet, on which the decision was made by the Hong Kong government. And then for the luncheon speech, for the speech made by Mr. Andy Chen, and then whether there has been a policy to ban political parties, all such things I won't address. And then for freedom of speech, I don't think it is actually related to the topic of the debate before us. If I still have time, I would also talk about that, but that's not my main point. And fourthly, are we going to make a wise decision? In particular, Mr. James To talked about the U.S.-Sino relationship. Are we adding oil or adding fuel to the fire? Are we sort of escalating the problem? I won't comment on that. Well, Hong Kong is a civilized, open society. I won't say as to whether our government should adopt a more open-minded approach. Like in the case of the UK, they have started to give reasons for rejection so that the applicant may appeal. I'm sure this can be taken up at a policy panel meeting, but I don't think it is really relevant to the debate before us. Again, it isn't, as Pt4 has said, that it is better for both parties to be given the chance to be heard, or whether we should have a more civilized, more open yardstick. Probably he's right, but I don't want to address such points. I would rather focus on the basis of Claudia Mo's motion. Well, Claudia Mo said that is a sort of a decision unjustified. And that's why she's asking for papers and evidence to be produced. Well, as I have said, I don't think it's necessary for us to talk about whether the decision was justified. Now, I want to say the following. We need to take everything into account. We're having this debate against the background of the U.S.-China relationship. We have also need to consider public interest. Should we sort of open the box and force the Secretary for Security and the Director of Immigration to appear before us and to disclose the reason? I think that's the crux of the matter. Many members refer to the powers under Article 154. Well, in fact, in the English version, it is very clear. It is a matter of the power to control. Yes, Pt4 referred to different examples, and he tried to compare what happened with overseas examples. I just want to say that I think we need to compare the practice exercised by different authorities rather than whether others are doing it better than us. Now, we give the prisoners in Hong Kong the right to vote. Prisoners in the UK have been denied this right. Parliament said no to the proposal to enfranchise the prisoners. Mr. Frederick Yik yesterday said that there were many cases of rejection every year, and on no occasion would the government disclose the reason. Mr. Horace Cheung, Priscilla Leung, and Christopher Cheung also gave a lot of examples. Horace Cheung gave the largest number of examples, including those in the US and the UK. This is more meaningful in terms of comparison. Now, of course, all international authorities would exercise or apply immigration controls. Of course, there are exceptions. The UK government would produce the reason, but then the mainstream practice is that when you exercise your power, you don't need to explain the reason. When you deny a person the application to enter your place. As to whether we should have a more civilized and more open approach, probably I would agree. For Mr. Dang Long Wai, yes, the government has done a lot, but then as to whether more should have been done, maybe, but I don't think we should invoke the PMP to ask for documents to be produced in the case of Dang Long Wai. Mr. President, I hope I won't be criticized for drawing the wrong comparisons. Now, Article 154 of the Basic Law, Article 154 is about the Immigration Department. For Article 63, and that's about the Department of Justice controlling criminal prosecutions. Again, the word used is control. Now, for this Department of Justice, I don't think it should disclose whether a person will be prosecuted. And I have looked up the Code of Prosecutors issued by the DOJ. For the sake of time, I'm not going to quote from it. But of course, back in 1987, the then SJ, Mr. Thomas, has said that we need to be fair to everybody. We shouldn't allow anybody to cast doubt on a particular suspect. It might very well have been in the public domain, but then public debate or disclosure of the information would lead to a public debate. People will start to talk about whether there is sufficient evidence. It's unfair to the person involved. The fair way to deal with it is to leave it in the hands of the court, and then the court will decide the guilt or otherwise of this person, instead of allowing information to be disclosed and allow a public debate on whether the person should be convicted. Now let's talk about the Immigration Department's decision. If we start to give the reasons, well, probably many people will talk about the red line theory, and they will also talk about Andy Chan's case, and then whether he is, Mr. Mallet is a journalist or not, and whether FCC is his employer. I don't think discussion of such a nature would be fair or would help. It is wrong for the government to start a public debate. It won't be justified by public interest. Of course, if Mr. Mallet would like to lodge an appeal, surely he will ask for a written reason. If he would like to lodge an appeal, of course he can have some follow-up work. But for the government to take the lead to disclose the information, and all the more, we shouldn't invoke the powers and privileges to compel the government to come up with the information. This would be similar to compelling the Department of Justice to appear before us and tell us why a person has been prosecuted and why another person hasn't been prosecuted. As we start to sort of look for the reason, of course, I'm going back on my words a little bit. Well, by adopting a high profile and try to examine what he has done in the past few years under magnifying glass, it may not be fair. I haven't got any evidence, but then just for argument's sake, I think you know that Hong Kong is the place where we have a lot of exchanges of intelligence, or you can also say that it's a place where we have a lot of spies. The FCC has been alleged to be a place where a lot of intelligence has been exchanged. Now, in terms of timing, I think it's a matter of misfortune. There may be information that's known to the authority but not to us, so we won't know. For what I've just said is merely for the purpose of making a guess. Well, for freedom of speech, if you ask me, I would say that there is room for improvement to rely on a often quoted cliche. Well, in fact, in the year 2018, our ranking in terms of freedom of expression dropped to the 70th. Well, for the USA, which is supposed to enjoy freedom of speech, hasn't fared quite well. It has also suffered from a drop in the ranking. For Hong Kong, we are now 45th, and the US is now the 70th. Or the other way around, the 45th for the US and then the 70th for Hong Kong. The president has always been talking about fake news, and he would like to revoke the licenses for the media. Probably next year they are going to see a more drastic fall in terms of the ranking. I'm not sure if you have time to sort of view a particular clip. Now, instead of $110 billion for the deal with Saudi Arabia, it then went up to $450 billion. And then we're told that this contract would affect a lot of U.S. employees. Instead of 40,000, it became 450,000, and then 1 million jobs will be at stake if the contract with Saudi Arabia would be cancelled. So we can see if the head of state is not careful about his words, this is what you're going to get. So for the Director of Immigration, I don't think he should lightly break the international convention. That is, we need to be very careful whether we're talking about the case of Victor Mallet or others trying to land in Hong Kong. I think we should try our best, our very best. Unless there is a very strong reason, we should refrain from making comments. So against such a background, I don't think there is any basis for such a motion. I don't think we have got anything to build a case to say that we need to unveil the information. We shouldn't compel the government to come here with all the documents. This is just like the proposal to force the Department of Justice to give us more information about a celebrity. Otherwise, it is an encroachment upon our right to freedom of information. Well, I think this is like the case that we won't compel EXCO members to tell us what has been discussed and what has been decided. And this is similar to the case of jurors. We won't force the jurors to tell us what has been decided. So it's a matter of public policy. On the one hand, we have freedom of information, public interest. On the other hand, we have to look at the conventions, both in Hong Kong and internationally adopted, and then we can tell whether we should go against all our conventions and adopt the proposal in the motion. So I spoke and I'm against the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Kwong Chun-yu. President, I really love to listen to Mr. Paul speak. He said in the beginning that there were 4 points he wouldn't touch on, and then he spent 4 minutes on that. He declared that he was a member of the FCC. I learned from his Facebook that he had meals there from time to time. Right, when he was, let's say he's eating dinner there, and then he was only halfway through the first course and was asked to leave and was not given any reasons. And of course, he would be unhappy and he would ask, on what basis are you asking me to leave? And the other party said that, please don't press me. There is no need for us to explain, you just go. And then I believe Mr. Paul for sure will not go. He, being such an eloquent speaker, will fight for his right to continue with his dinner there or lunch there. So we have to understand that this issue has aroused international concern, and the way the government handles it is very childish. We asked whether the two are related, looking at responses from the CE and officials. They didn't say yes or no. They asked people not to cross that red line, and they said that it had nothing to do with freedom of the press. Now, if it is really unrelated, we will help Mr. Porte to defend his right to continue his meal there. Well, never, whether it's justified or not, I think Mr. Mallet has been denied entry to Hong Kong arbitrarily. Would you say that it's got nothing to do with the freedom of the press? Of course not. And Mr. Porte said that you would be opening the box if you summons the government officials to testify here. No, it's not that we want to open the lid. It's because the kettle is boiling. We must not turn a blind eye to this. We cannot turn a blind eye to see when the kettle is boiling. We must open the lid and see what's happening. And Mr. Mallet has been in Hong Kong for so long, and his the fact that he is a journalist, and all of a sudden he's denied renewal of his visa. Please don't be so childish. Indeed, a red line has been drawn there, and people have deliberately made it life difficult for him. And Mr. Porte hinted that Hong Kong is a place where a lot of spies and special agents are at work. I was thinking that it was it a script of a drama? Never did I know that such a small place at Hong Kong, in FCC, with a place that is related to spies and espionage, and maybe a lot is happening and we don't know. Well, it's so easy to make such speculations. But you have to take note of the history of FCC. It was first established in Chongqing, and the whole thing is rather baffling. So what is this debate about? I agree that perhaps it is more civilized to avoid repetitions of this in the future. But you cannot deny that this is related to press freedom. We've been given a strong signal from the international community. The FCC gave a very strong statement saying that it was an extraordinary event, and without good justifications, FCC asked the government to withdraw this decision. And even you asked the administration to give an explanation ASAP, saying that Hong Kong is a place of high degree of autonomy, and freedom of the press is one of the core values of Hong Kong that must be respected. So the international community has expressed their concerns for this matter. And Ms. Claudia MO's motion would like to summons officials to testify here to give a full account of the matter, to assure people who care for press freedom in Hong Kong, and to alleviate or to calm speculations from the international community. Now, if you say that we won't give you reasons, don't come here. If you come here, we'll ban you from entering. This is too bad to accept. Press freedom in Hong Kong is hard to come by, and even the journalist Jean Frontier said they were only 70th. We rank 70th in terms of press freedom. We're working very hard to defend this line. You have to face culture in your own medium organization that may affect your professional autonomy. It will also affect the general climate of Hong Kong. If we no longer have press freedom, or it is under attack, there is no way we can leave this to our future generations. This is something we take pride in. Well, President Jefferson said that when you're asked to choose between the government and the media, you would go for the latter, because it is the fourth power. This time we have a classic example of abuse of power by the government, saying that there is no need to explain the reason for its behavior. And Reagan said that the government is not here to solve problems. The government is the problem itself. Why have you created this drama out of the blue? And the way you handle it is really very clumsy. You have never explained the reason why. You talked about other countries or cities doing the same without giving reasons. But this is a very sensitive time, and Mr. Mallet has just moderated that event, and then after that, he was denied a renewal. So Mr. Chia Chi-fung, who has chaired a city forum for a long time, he would be barred from entry in a number of places. So the response from the administration in the wake of the event is really rather ugly. I ask pro-establishment members to take a look at the government's reply. I think you rather want the government to be more candid and stronger in its stance. In fact, the issue was not a big deal, and now it has dealt a blow to one of our core values, which is freedom of the press. How important is press freedom? Without press freedom, we wouldn't have been able to disclose or expose different problems of society in this council. We might not have learned about unauthorized structures of the SJ's homes and or DFJ's homes, and we maybe ignorance is bliss, but Ms. Claudia MO's motion is just to give the government an opportunity to come clean, to tell people in the international arena who are concerned about this matter so that they know what has happened. The American Chamber of Commerce has issued a statement and it said that the refusal of renewal of visa to Mr. Mallet has sent a very dangerous signal, and that there can be no proper business activities here. And EU said in a statement that it will keep a very close eye on the development of events and is asked for reasons why there is refusal of renewal to a journalist. And then press freedom and freedom of expression should be protected by our laws in Hong Kong. Should we address these concerns and queries, there should be an opportunity for us to come clean so that such speculations will not continue. Now, if the administration thinks that everything is procedural, just, and in order, it should come here to explain. Maybe after that, we will be found to be wrong, and we will then know that it's got nothing to do with press freedom as claimed by the government. We just want government officials to come here to explain, and we have spent time to debate on this proposal. And of course, I think the voting results will be very clear. Mr. Stephen Ho has already pressed his voting button. I think we should give an opportunity for government officials to answer inquiries and queries by international organizations. I don't think these inquiries are arbitrary, so they should perhaps explain to them. We should make use of this occasion to defend our press freedom, our cherished freedom of the press in Hong Kong, and tell people that it is still well and alive, so that there won't be any speculation here. Well, only free news without fettered will ensure that there are checks and balances on the government. I think this famous quote by an international judge has been used by many scholars. So freedom of the press is intangible, but we can feel it in the climate of a city. We can tell when we look at how the government handles things involving the press. This will show whether the government has the conscience and the duty to protect and safeguard press freedom. On one occasion, a local journalist was covering an event in Beijing, and he was assaulted and he was handcuffed to a police vehicle. Regardless of your position, I believe even pro-establishment members here would not want to see such things happening. Well, he was only covering events with his pen, not his fists. He wanted to report things. He wanted to report the truth. We need to be vigilant. We have to see whether our institution is being eroded and whether things have happened without our consciousness. Now, if we do not look at Mr. Mallet's incident, maybe some time from now there will be another incident and yet another. We have to be vigilant, because press freedom is not tangible, but we can feel it. We should continue to protect it so that we can safeguard our city. As I said in the beginning of my speech, I use Mr. Pt4 as an example. I hope you won't mind. But then I think it is a very straightforward analogy or metaphor. He has been a member of FCC for more than 3 decades. If for no reason he is asked to leave, he will feel unhappy. Many international organizations and places have asked what has gone wrong with this government, and yet we are not giving them an answer. And you may say that the subject himself can go and find out the truth, but this is a very strong signal, and there are already questions asked of our government. It's quite rare that for an organization to say that this is a worrying sign, the capitalist market cannot operate effectively. Would you say that the American Chamber of Commerce has said something wrong? No, I think it is food for thought for us. Our officials should be more transparent and be more civilized, as said by Mr. Pote. Now, if they do a better job, perhaps we can then better defend press freedom, which is gradually waning away. Press freedom is not easy to acquire. I am confident in our journalists. Thank you.
Mr. Stephen Ho, thank you. Just now,